So as you said, if you guys want to interrupt me for any question, feel free to do so, no problem. And so we can discuss right away the topic, okay? So everybody sees the slides. I think you are seeing okay, right?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm Ricardo Primi. I'm from University of San Francisco. Let me take down. And also I'm a research consultant in EduLab 21 Ayrton Senna Institute. I'm here with a scholarship from CAPES, also have some from FAPESP. So a little bit about my profile. So I'm a psychologist and now visiting scholar here. Usually start studying intelligence, personality, and psychometrics. And I think since 2008, I like define myself as like a data science to focus on psychometrics. So that's I think I define now. Um, uh, so the topic of my presentation is about SENNA and the assessment of social emotional skills. But what is SENNA, right? So this is a part of initiative of EduLab 21 of Ayrton Senna Institute with the idea to develop, actually to bring the social emotional learning agenda in Brazil, or to foster this agenda, right? So of course, there's a lot of things happening, but the Ayrton Senna wants to like foster this agenda, especially with a very concrete project to creating an instrument to monitor large scale to monitor social emotional skills in large scale assessments. Okay, so SENNA, we use this name for an instrument actually that was developed to assess social emotional skills, and this instrument is based on the conceptual framework of the 5-factor theory of personality. I will show you this a little bit. And the aim is to use it in large-scale assessments in public education and make it available for free. This was started with a project together with OECD. OECD has a big project on studying the social emotional skills. And Ayrton Senna started collaborating with OECD since the beginning. So this project was like born from this cooperation, okay? So I have here some of this. So this is just an idea of the EduLab 21. Sorry, I think you were kind of, sorry, here. So the EduLab 21 is a center, like pretty much like the Lehman Center is. It has three big aims: is to produce knowledge, scientific knowledge, bridge between science and education and public policy, and then adapt this content or this knowledge here to use in education, especially to improve education. So this is the main objective of the center, the Lab 21. So this is so this project started 2013. So I have here some of these the technical reports that were done, and by that time started me and Danielle, we started working on this instrument in the real study. I will tell you about a bit of this study, and then together with OECD we met Oliver John and Philippe de Fruit. They were like experts in the group, OECD group, as we were participating there. So then we started like collaboration with these guys, and then continuing to today. So working on this. This is the brochure for the project. Now I think the project, this project of OECD is, I think is preparing a report for the end of this year, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So this is what everything I will present is like the work of these guys, plus a lot of people from Ayrton Senna Institute, like the researchers there, and a lot of them are here seeing this presentation too. So welcome. So what is the scientific challenges of this agenda, man? So some couple of questions, very big questions, like what are social emotional skills? That's the first thing, right? The second is how to measure them, and how valid and reliable are those measures? Can we measure, can these measures be used to monitor social emotional skills development, right? Why to measure them? And this is the most important question, right? So one thing is, does social emotional skills affect learning directly or affect other important outcomes in life? Does school influence the social emotional skills? And in a chain, and does these changes in social emotional skills change also other outcomes in life? These questions are very tough. Like, so this is kind of causal inference questions, right? So the relationship is not only about relationships, the causal relationship between those. So of course I'm not answering, or, but anyway, so this is the most kind of a summary of the big questions. I will discuss with you a little bit about what are, how to measure them, and some associations with social emotional skills and learning as data showing the validity of SENNA. Okay. So what are social emotional skills? If we go to, so there is a very review here, interesting, that classify the theories, the frameworks in 4 groups, like comprehensive frameworks that contains a broad link of domains, of dimensions, deep domains frameworks, like ones that go deep in one domain, like executive functions or emotional intelligence. These are like kind of constructs related to social emotional skills, right? Single domain frameworks like the growth mindset from Carol Dweck from Stanford, for instance, or others like GRIT, for instance, for Angela Duckworth. So it's single domain frameworks. And then consensual list frameworks. They usually are like groups of different actors that define what is important for education and define this to be on their plan, like curriculum of the school, right? If we did a survey and found like 20 major systems and kind of 267 defined skills with this. And there is this problem that Jingo Jango fallacy, like sometimes one skills with have a different names, as they were like 2 things or 3 things, different things, but they're the same. Or there's the same name, but referring to completely different things. So this is a problem for like, we don't have like a very comprehensive taxonomy. We have like different good models, but not like comprehensive taxonomy. And these frameworks usually inherits from 2 groups, like educational and social psychology, like more focus on cognitive constructs like motivations, beliefs, goals, and also from personality psychology. Not a lot, but personality psychology. We use the Big 5 taxonomy. So before we move on, I would like to say, so this is a very interesting, so this is a big example of one of the most common frameworks, the Cazel. Yeah, so is there a question? Or? Okay, the Cazel framework that proposed like 4, 5 broad abilities like social awareness, self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, self-management, relationship skills, okay? But before we move on, I mentioned personality, but usually people think that personalities describe constructs that the way we typically think, feel, and behave. And I mean, think about social emotional skills that are abilities. Abilities are like potential to perform in a class of tasks, right? So how you say that some personality is related to skills. So one thing is that if we take this definition of potential to perform in a class of tasks, we can think that some personal characteristics are prompt you to do good in some situations, like extroverts, like that have ability to interact with others and so forth. So they have a potential to perform better in situations that require social interaction, right? And in this sense, this personal characteristic is kind of a potential to do good in this situation. So it can be defined as a facet of this can be defined as an ability. Okay, so we can treat some of these personal characteristics, those pieces that are related to good outcomes or important things like an ability. And then there's another confusion. Usually people think that personality is not malleable, like personality doesn't change, and we want to in this literature we want to go to skills that can be changed and the school can be changed, okay, can change those skills. But this is kind of a misunderstanding. If you go to the literature, there is a lot of evidence showing that personality is malleable, right? And is as malleable as other constructs like motivation, self-efficacy, interests, and beliefs. There is also some types of change, that's at least three types of change: rank order and consistency. Actually, personality can be correlated in in two time points, but it can be like a mean level change. Everybody's changing the same way. And the same way, there is the individual differences in these change. Some people change more in some characteristics, others change less, and they change the position relative to the group. This is kind of individual difference in change. There is evidence about all these three things, right, in the literature. So I'm pointing here some of this reference for you. Especially this one is very interesting, comparing personality and cognitive constructs, and this is the policy relevance of personality trust from Brent Roberts and his group, actually. And so you have the slides later, so you can see this. So, and for us, this was very important work that was inspiring for us in the beginning. Is a review made by Patrick Gillen and his colleagues in ETS about this area, like the frameworks, and they propose in this work, like we can be like Big Five can be a useful model to understand social emotional skills, because this Big Five come from like a taxonomic tradition in psychology, trying to define in a broad way what are the personal characteristics that person differs, right? The person differs in several ways, so they try to define very broadly what are those characteristics. So more importantly, they define empirically. So they do like empirical tests of this classification system. So via factor analysis. So and they propose here that we could use this as a way to classify all this, classify the skills as like a comprehensive framework. So with that, we started the first study. We saw the pilot study for the main study of OECD. Right. So the problem back then is that there is a lack of empirical. So we have a very good, of course, frameworks for social emotional skills, but there is a lack of empirical studies testing this comprehensive taxonomy more broadly, right? And there's also lack of studies that combine psychological traditions with educational and social cognition traditions, like personality psychology and these cognitive constructs. So with that, we did like 3 studies in this first pilot. One, we surveyed instruments. Another one, we did an empirical study trying to classify. We combined different instruments and did like a item factor analysis to classify this. Our question was if we can use Big Five to understand those constructs, and then we created an instrument we call SENNA 1, measuring. So this here we wanted. So can we use some existing items, scales, or do we do a new like instrument? And we decided here to create a new instrument, and then that was born like SENNA 1, and that was used in a pilot study for OECD and a big study in Rio de Janeiro. Then, so I will bring some. So we have some references about this. This study, described these 3 studies here. Also, we go deep on the idea of the Big Five as a like conceptual framework taxonomy for these skills. The idea, so one study, we review the instruments. We can think of the instruments as, so we can see direct assessment, right? So we have instruments that are tasks, some of the skills that what we can do, and there are also indirect mediated assessments, right? The technique of assessment that's usually self-reported or observer reports. So you have questions about yourself, and then you think about yourself if you behave in that way and respond in these self-reports. And also there is new behavioral methods like computerized assessment, process data, digital footprint, and all those sorts of deep learning and machine learning here. So in our view, we see for large-scale assessment, one conclusion is that still the questionnaires are the most like visible, right, for large-scale assessments in classrooms where we don't have computers, like Brazil. And so we selected questionnaires, like self-reported questionnaires, right? And then we provide 75 instruments for visibility, like I said, predictive power, if they predict outcomes of interest, if they tap dimensions that are malleable, and also if they're psychometrically valid. From that, we selected 8 instruments, and these are the instruments, like, so we have locus of control, self-esteem, a lot of, so these are the tests, and these are the constructs they measure. like core self-evaluations, grit from Angela Duckworth. So here we have the number of items and number of scales. Then in our first study, we tried to do like, I don't know if we see this, okay. We tried to do a psychometric property, actually empirical classification. So what we did is we asked ourselves, what is the underlying dimensionality of these scales? Like we have 21 scales, right? So we need 21 groups of constructs to describe them, or less constructs, right? Or 5, like the big 5. Which are the best items also to measure those dimensions. So we have like 4,000 students from grade 5 to 12. Of course, we tested how many items they can answer. So usually for 5 grades, so 60 items is like ideal for them. And then, so we did different booklets and a planned missing design when students don't get all the items, right? But they see parts of it, and we do in an optimized way, so we can do like the full correlation matrix between items. And then we did like item factor analysis. Yes.
Yeah, just a quick question. Yeah. So where was your sample drawn? Is it 4,000 students from Brazil, or is it 4,000
yeah, no, sorry,
yeah, countries, or where are they from?
Okay, sorry, I'm doing fast because I'm so this
okay.
was from Rio de Janeiro. See, this is Rio de Janeiro study. Was done in Rio de Janeiro in collaboration with the Secretary of Education, right? And it was done in the entire state of Rio de Janeiro. It was a sample from the state system, and so this was the first study. This psychometric study was like small sample. Then the last study was like 24,000 students from the entire Rio de Janeiro. It was drawn from the Rio. From this analysis, we selected 22 items for SENNA 1, but I would want to just show you what we found. So this is like the factor structure. So you have here the scales, like those 16 or 21 scales, I don't remember exactly. And here's the groupings, like the factors. What we are doing here is seeing, we started with the correlations with all the scales, right? So for instance, grit and conscientiousness, that's one of the factors from Big 5. If those scales are measuring the same thing, if a person is high in one scale, should be high in another, right? So they are effect of the same underlying dimension, so they should be highly correlated. And then we form a group. That's the logic of factor analysis, right? So what we found is actually, in fact, we found five groups here, but in a way, 2 of the Big 5 combined in this first group. And then we have all the other 4 of the other 3 dimensions of Big 5, and 1 dimension that was more of self-beliefs and down here. Let me show you another. I will not go into all the details, but we did another study with this data set that it was more like with confirmatory factor analysis, where we get like markers of the 5 factors, and then we put like one of the scales here and try to predict from the Big 5 if we can predict this. And for that, so here you have the table with these standardized regression coefficients here predicting each of these scales. And you see, for instance, grit is like persistency, like is almost similar to the concept of the Big 5, the conscientiousness, right? Another interesting thing is that self-efficacy. So we have a scale of self-efficacy is how do you believe that you can achieve some stuff, you can do. Sorry, I'm keep clicking here. So there is achievement, self-efficacy, emotional, and social. What we saw is achievement self-efficacy is highly related to conscientiousness and open-mindedness. Emotional, for instance, is the construct of negative emotional regulation from the Big 5, and also a little bit of openness. Social is related to 2, like extroversion and agreeableness. So we saw that there's a mapping of this self-efficacy with the domains of the Big 5. So we have other more complex mappings, but anyway, so this is all discussed on the paper. So the
Ricardo,
conclusion.
excuse me, can I
Yes.
ask you a question, Martin
Yes.
Carnoway?
Yes,
Was this questionnaire given in schools?
Yes.
Where were the kids?
Was given in schools in one class. Like we tested, we did a pilot before to see if it was how many questions the students can answer in a classroom, a typical classroom in real life.
Do you think where you give this questionnaire makes a difference?
Where, for instance, the context, if it's in home or
Yeah,
in
if
school.
you gave this thing on a soccer field, would it be different?
Probably
beach?
The younger, I think the younger the kid is, I think makes a difference, I think. For instance, we are trying now to develop one in a project for younger kids, like 6, 7 years old.
No, but I mean, doesn't the location affect how people answer the questionnaire, particularly about self-efficacy?
Oh, yeah, so we got it. So the one thing we ask is that, so we try to give this context on the item, right, of the questionnaire. So we ask them to think about that situation.
Yeah, but thinking about it and sitting in a classroom is...
Yeah. Usually it's empirical question.
I'm not a psychologist, but I might feel differently if someone gave me a self-efficacy questionnaire.
Yeah.
If I were attending a tennis camp rather than sitting in a classroom.
Probably, yes. It's empirical. It's a good question. Probably it will change. And we have some, I think we have one study that Daniel Santos did with a home interview and school. And he noted some minor differences. There was not a big difference, but they are interesting. So that's yes. Especially in self-efficacy, maybe the context is more important. That's for sure. Yeah, a good question. But there is like a general.
It would be interesting to know which of these dimensions, which of these parameters that you're measuring is affected by location. Right. Nobody's ever done such a study?
Yes, that I'm not sure now. So that's why I also remember some of the studies that Daniel did, like because most of the things are more kind of very contextualized questions about some very specific context-specific question, maybe change more. Yes, probably there are studies.
I always wondered if Angela Duckworth had interviewed kids in Harlem, some of whom were very successful drug dealers, whether she would have gotten a different concept of grit.
Yeah, probably. Yes, this probably not, because yes, we have been doing this in several contexts, like we did in also different states and in the classroom with different socioeconomical levels. So we have a very pretty heterogeneous sample here. And we did actually like some measurement invariance studies across. In the real study on the paper, we did that, especially on younger kids and older kids. We did also with we have a paper on this that's being done on comparing different socioeconomical backgrounds, and it doesn't change. So this we can say for sure for this big SENNA 1, there is no change, especially in the measurement parameters like the general endorsability of our tendency to endorse the questions or correlation with the others. Usually it's the construct. That's an interesting thing. Even for the big five, if you go, so that's the point of the big five. There's these 5 dimensions. We find this in a lot of places. Even so, there's lots of tentatives to disprove this theory of the 5, and we find this always. We find this big chunks or domains of constructs, right? So this is the final model we came up with from this study. So it's actually a 6-factor, right? Because we have one group here, self-management, open-mindedness, that's more related to self-management is a top-down regulation, right? It's a willing to achieve, and then the behaviors you do to regulate yourself. So this is related to greed, is the same, is domain of greed, right? Also volitional controls or the metacognition, self-regulated learning, right? So this is one aspect. Another aspect is open-mindedness, is your tendency to, like your desire for learning is more like a motivation, closely linked to intrinsic motivation, but also creativity and other stuff here. So it's another, so, and these two are most related to achievement. And then we have like another set of broad abilities like negative emotion regulation. So this is more about regulating emotions. So self-regulation can be more this top-down, more cognitive regulation, regulation of behaviors of your thinking or of your behavior. And this is an emotional regulation, like how do you regulate your emotions, especially like sadness, anxiety, or anger, right? And then also, then here's the sixth factor we found, like self-beliefs and mindsets. So this is a kind of a different thing from the big five. It's kind of your specific knowledge about yourself, about your capabilities, about the world and how the world operates, like locus of control, if you can influence your world or not. And this is connected also to attitudes. But anyway, so this self-beliefs is kind of a more different concept from these other ones. And then there's interpersonal dimensions here that are, one is more how your ability to interact with the others, or to your like tendency to easiness to just interact, and also the quality of the, here is more quality of the interactions, like if you can perceive other emotions, so you consider others, not only interact with them, so you consider their perspective, so you are empathy is here in agreeableness and so forth. And here, so we have all the more the quantitative constructive relationship with this five of the six of the big five. So the conclusions of this study is that, so big five taxonomy is a useful model to anchor these concepts, okay? What's interesting that we find one factor outside this conceptual framework of the big five is that the self-belief, the beliefs and self-beliefs and mindsets. Also, we found also that domain level, these concepts are useful to organize, is a conceptual organizer of these social emotional skills. But most measures are more specific, one level down. They are specific facets of those broad concepts, like open-mindedness, right? So you can have like desire for learning is one thing. Another thing is creativity or imagination, or for instance, in the self-management, you have greed, that's persistence, but you can have other facets that is organization, right? So the measures are always specific facets of these broad domains. Also, it was interesting that we found self-efficacy was like kind of a two things matched together. One is the general belief of I'm capable of doing something, and another thing is what specific thing I'm telling you that I'm capable of doing, like with the domain of the capability, right? And these specific domains are aligned with the big five. With this, we call this 5 or 6 the core themes of the social emotional functioning, like because they are broad, they are like comprehensive concepts to understand those social emotional skills. From that, from these learnings, we try to think about and plan the development of this test and to evolve and to create a new test. And we wanted actually to measure domains and facets. So we want to go down to this other level. We want 2 levels for this. So we want items that measure the usual way of these questionnaires that are identity, like self-report of habitual characteristics, like for instance, this question that I don't get upset easily, for instance, and then you answer in a Likert scale, say I'm a lot like that or no, and also self-efficacy layer. So for the same skill, we wanted identity and self-efficacy, for instance, asking the question, how well can you, for instance, avoid getting nervous? So this is the same content, but now we were asking about a specific ability, right? And we want to measure in both poles, like high end and low end. So we want to measure the high end of this is the ability and also the low end. I will explain why we want to do that in a minute, but anyway. So from that, we did like 3 studies for SENNA 2. It's like, this was like for period 4 years, like, and we did three large-scale studies. Like one is in Ceará, study one. We test a lot of items, like 327 items, mostly like 30, about 34,000 students. So this is also again in the schools, in the classroom, as a part of their cognitive assessment. So they have a questionnaire. So we included this question there. We use planned mission design, all these things to factor analyze all these items. Then we selected a group from this and did a second test study, 306 items again, with balance with planned mission design. This time was high school students, was a computerized application. And then finally we selected 162 items for SENNA and tested the final version in São Paulo, like 50,000 students. And these students are also, again, for the school, entire state of São Paulo. They participate in Ayrton Senna program of reading. So they were invited to participate. We initially thought we will invite and we get like 4,000 or 5,000. Then a lot of students want to participate. So we had 50,000. So this is not like a random sample of São Paulo, but it has students for all of São Paulo. And for this, we produce like 18 scales, 3 items in the low end, 3 items in the high end, and 3 self-efficacy items. And so we also have like a short version of 54 items measuring these 18 dimensions here, like I will show you. So this is the construct. So we have these 5 constructs, and then inside these constructs, we have these scales like determination, organization, focus. So this is the scales for SENNA. For each of these, we have 9 items, 3 positive, 3 negative, and 3 self-efficacy items. So we have all these constructs here. So one question was, we have like 2 papers already describing a little bit about this SENNA 2, and this is in Portuguese, I can send you, but then we have one in English. And we have the manual that's almost ready, so we are revising the technical manual explaining all these studies. But one question going down some more practical is there an association of this social emotional skills with learning? So I will show you some data from SENNA from this one. And the question is, so do we gain when we go to domain from the facets? Because we have SENNA 1 was domain test, right? It was only 6 dimensions. And now we have like 18 scales and we can calculate the domains, the 5, but we have specific scales. So does this improve our prediction of achievement? So I have here a multiple regression predicting language, standardized language and math for the São Paulo data. Here's kind of 12,000 students that did the SARESP, that standardized test. And then is a multiple regression of the 5 domains predicting achievement. As we see in the literature that actually open-mindedness is so this is the standardized regression, 0.15, and self-managed usually is higher for test grades, but for standardized achievement is not that high, it's 0.7, but this is in the equation. If we get only the 0, the correlation is higher. And also the amity, this is agreeableness, so it's 17. So we have like 8% of variance explained here. Is like overall validity is around 0.30, 0.21. It's similar to what we found in other like instruments. But when we go to facets, look at this. So how now I have the same, it's the same instrument, just a different organization of so the number of items is the same. They are not, but we calculated the facets here. And then we go up to 18% of the variance, like 0.42. So we have like an improvement in the prediction using the facets. Interesting enough, for instance, all these here are dimensions of self-management. Like determination is more of achievement, is the grit of Angela Duckworth, focus, order, persistence, responsibility. And we have some negative relationships. And this is interesting. Why is that? Right now, having this ability predicts like lower language, for instance, lower math. Why is that? That's interesting. I have here, so this is the scatter plot of order, the organization, and then achievement in reading. There's a small positive trend here, right? But when we break down order by achievement, that's another facet of so achievement here is determination. So this is a facet of, it's a different scale of the self-management domain. It's the one that's highest correlated with achievement. Then we see that within those groups, so here is people with low actually determination and high determination. And then we see in those groups, the order is negative, the correlation. And what we see is that order is also related to determination, because there are two measures of the same construct, right? But the specific aspect of order is negatively related to achievement, to standardized achievement. And the message here is that if you have what's most important is determination, you're like having high standards. If you have, and usually when you have high standards, you are more organized and so forth. But it's not a thing about order. If you have high standards, that's okay. But having the same, like if you have the same level in determination of others, people that have more tend to be more organized. Maybe that's not kind of good for learning. Maybe this is a sign of another thing and another characteristic. And we only can find this using facets, right? There's another thing here about there is another type of interaction, but I will skip this because in interest of time. And I want to show you this thing is the last point of this presentation is that we started. We say we wanted to use positive and negative phrase items, and why we want to include that. So if you go to the literature, most people say no, throw away these items, they don't work like negative items, like so they do like psychometric studies here, or they are not working. And why we want to use that? So one thing just beginning is that there's two ways you can build these items. One is using negation. Like for instance, I have one question: I fulfill tasks. This is the positive side, like, right? So you like are persistent, you fulfill tasks, and then the negative, I do not fulfill tasks, I commit to. So this is the negation form. We are not seeing we are not like in favor of this kind of transformation, because we have do not, and this make the item more complicated. What we think is a polar opposite form that's better, like a fulfill task, and I have difficulty in fulfilling what I promise. So this is a measure of low end, but there is no negation. So we think this is the better way to build these negative items. But why we want to do that? So the self-report, so for this is kind of items from Perseverance on PISA. Self-report is actually an observer report, but it's you observing yourself, like your past self, and how you are, how you behave, right? And you are thinking about how you are. So you are thinking about your past self and trying to report to me. What I want you to report to me is your persistence, for instance, with these questions, right? But there's a lot of things in the middle, right? So is there language, for instance? If you understand those questions, another thing is the process of memory. Can you remember this thing? Can you remember about this thing, how you behave? There is response style, the way you use the scale. There is your motivation to answer to me, or there's context, as Carnoy said, right? So there's lots of other dimensions between you. So it's a rate. That's why a rater mediated assessment. You are a rater of yourself, and then all your attributes also influence this report to me. So there's a lot of problems with validity of this. And one thing that happens is that, for instance, if we have two items, a positive and a negative item, like I'm often talkative, I am often quiet. So both items are measuring extroversion, right? So, but from different poles. Usually, what do you expect? If you say you are talkative, you say no, I'm not quiet, or you don't know, you are in the middle, right? Or you say yes, I'm quiet. So here, right? So you say yes for this item, and I'm not talkative. So this is extroverted, introverted. So this is the expected pattern of response. But usually people usually give this. So they answer both true. Like, yes, you are talkative, yes. You are often quiet, yes. So what's happening? Or they say both no to this. What's happening is this. So this is kind of a pattern that is related more to what we call acquiescence index. Like the concrete name of this is acquiescence index. It's like agreeing, not paying attention to the content of the item. So you're just agreeing or disagreeing. so the acquiescence index. But what is this index? Well, it reflects a lot of, can reflect a lot of things. Can reflect that you didn't understand the question, or you are not paying attention. You are like reading very, passing through and reading very fast and doesn't get the meaning and just answering one, giving one response and so forth. It could be like that you are like that you have those two characteristics. You are thinking about a context that you are talkative, a context that you are quiet. So you give like it's actually a true response of you, and so forth. But anyway, what we found is that those patterns of responses are usually related using literature to more low motivation or difficulties understanding the questions and so forth. So this kind of responses are indication of low motivation. And this is, of course, the trait response, right? But when we mix these questions in a questionnaire, what happens is very interesting, is that what happens usually is that you have both of these dimensions, like the trait dimensions is the blue and the acquiescence, the same item, right? But then when we correct those items, for instance, here, for instance, if you say, so we have acquiescence in gray and the trait in blue. When we correct this item, we need to reverse this one, right? Reverse, because this is a negative side, so we need to bring this. If you say I'm talkative and I'm not quiet, so we need to reverse this to count points for extroversion. When we do that, so we bring these two here, the positive sign. So this side is a positive, this is negative. When we multiply -1 to this item, so we get the blue is positive and the gray is negative, and then it cancels out. So the noise, the acquiescence cancels out. So I have a more like psychometric explanation here of this mechanism, but I call this noise canceling mechanism, and we could even so it's exactly the same mechanism that happens on the headphones. And so bringing these items to a scale is a very important. Why? Because it corrects for this, everything that is happening here. If you say here, everything that's eventually happening here is removed from the variance of the scale when we sum these items. And of course, if it's something true, you are losing this, right? But if it's not, so you are improving the measure. It's an empirical question if you are improving or not. So we did some studies like comparing negative and positive items and acquiescence. A lot of psychometric studies here I have here, but we found that it improves a lot the validity. This one is that shows that this matter for validity. And interestingly enough, Kronbach from Stanford said this in 46. So see what he said. He said that the negative items are more valid than the positive ones, because they say, since the response tendency affects an answer only when the student is to some degree uncertain about the content of the item, acquiescence tends to make false items more valid and true items less valid. The poor student guessing tends to be right on the true item because of acquiescence, but tends to be wrong on the false item. So false items alone are often reliable, and as reliable as valid as entire test of double the length. So this is, he was saying about those items as true false items, right? But this applies to leakage too. And we test exactly this hypothesis on this SENNA data in Brazil. So this is what we did here is we separated the negative and the positive items and then studied their criterion validity, how well those items, those scales based on these two items predict achievement, right? So here what I have is a match achievement, right? And then here I have the self-management scale. So higher self-managed usually is positively related to achievement because the people have high standards and so forth. But then I have 4 graphs here with levels of acquiescence. What does it mean? So high level means that students are giving you these inconsistent responses like high and high. If it's only true items, if they give you, they agree with the item, so they will have higher scores in conscientiousness, right? Because it's only positive items. So the acquiescence is confounded with the trait. So what happens, and this is these guys here, what happens is that they will have higher scores. These guys that are more, the part of the sample that have high acquiescence by any reason, they're giving you these responses, so it's an inconsistent response. So they have higher scores in self-management, but they tend to also have lower scores in math, right? So we have this side populated. What ended up happening is that you suppress the relationship between self-management and math because it's a confounder, right? So we have a second variable that's confounding the true relationship, the true that we think is positive based on meta-analysis of the relationship between conscientious and math achievements. So, and you see this is highly here, and also in the other side, we can by the same reasons inflate the relationship, and exactly what's happening in the middle. Here is only students that give you the expected response, so then the relationship is more positive. So this matters a lot for achievement, having those heights on the scale. Here I have the table of the true and false keyed items. So you see always the false keyed items more valid than the true keyed items. And then when we correct for acquiescence, they become similar. So we also did the same analysis. So PISA has some positive and negative items in 2012 of perseverance. I did the same analysis on PISA data. So this is international data. We see exactly the same. So you see the same graph, like this suppression effect of acquiescence. So this is very important to include. So that's with that. So I'm running very fast because I had like 30 minutes, end up talking 50 minutes, but anyway. So in general, Big Five is a usable taxonomy to conceptualize and integrate these different frameworks. We also did this crosswalk between Cazel and Big Five in one of the papers I showed you. I can point to if you want. We found also the SENNA is a valid and reliable visible instrument to measure social-emotional skills. And also we learned a lot about this, like how to improve validity of these questionnaires using this some old techniques like acquiescence, but in a new way, like using more psychometric methods now. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and now I'll let you talk a little.